Now, it's time to say a very good afternoon to Dr. Rakib Ehsan from the Centre on Radicalisation and Terrorism. He's written a piece in the Telegraph today about the whole business of that terrible, terrible thing that happened in Paris. There have been marches in the streets of Paris. It hasn't been covered massively by the press in this country, strangely enough, but there have been massive reactions over in France because this young man was allowed to, or was able to, behead a teacher in broad daylight, effectively, just because he was advocating free speech. Dr. Rakib, very good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, very well indeed. Thanks very much for joining us on this one. A terrible, awful event, well, the like of which we thought maybe we'd seen the back of. You've written a piece in which you say that we should be massively wary now of this kind of thing. Tell us why.
Well, I think that in the piece that I authored for the Telegraph, I said that it should be a wake-up call for the rest of Europe.
Mm.
I felt that this terrorist attack, this was not simply a gruesome murder of a school teacher. I felt that it was a vicious attack on the integrity of the French Republic, its long and rich history of secularism, and it does speak to broader issues of sovereignty. Who decides what can be said in the public realm? What kind of materials are used in schools? To what extent should religious sensitivities be respected in the social mainstream?
Mm.
So I feel that countries these are just not problems in France when we're looking at the threat of Islamist separatism. These are also problems in the UK, in Germany, and other European countries. And I do feel that for too long, political classes within those different countries, they haven't taken this issue seriously enough, or rather that they're just reluctant because of the sensitivities which surround these kind of social problems.
Sure. And interesting that this kid came from Chechnya, because up until, I suppose, that murder last Friday, Chechnya had kind of gone out of everybody's consciousness, hadn't it? And we'd almost forgotten that there was a very bloody war waged there, a civil war between the Russian state and Islamic separatists in Chechnya who were trying to make it into an Islamic state.
Well, I'd make the point there that I feel when we're talking about the broader political culture in Western Europe, I think that mainstream politicians, they've almost overindulged in pursuing socially liberal policies, especially when it comes to immigration, refugee, asylum policy, social integration, social cohesion. And they fail to understand the risks involved if there are unsuccessful integration outcomes among individuals who come from unstable and vastly different cultural and religious contexts. To integrate, if there's a failure to integrate those individuals into conventional liberal democratic society, then you have a very serious problem on your hands when it comes to community relations in modern day European societies.
Exactly right. And you were saying as well that there was a speech that Emmanuel Macron made back in October, I think, in which he said that he was going to address this whole Islamic separatist issue, because France does have a big problem, doesn't it?
Well, I say that France certainly does have a big problem. So if I just give you some statistics, survey data rather, there was a survey of French Muslims back in 2016. 29% of the French Muslims polled said that ultimately the sort of Islamic moral and legal code Sharia, it felt it was more important for them to follow that as opposed to French secular
Mm.
law. Now, in that survey, a quarter of the respondents were classified as hardliners. So these are usually young people who lived in the outskirts of cities, low skilled, not particularly well integrated in the French labour market, who are supportive of the wearing of the burqa, polygamy, and the general supremacy of Islamic law. So you do see there are very serious problems there when you're looking at it's almost a construction of a counter society
Mm.
in France, and you see the kind of the sort of religious authoritarianism there. It directly contradicts the French secular law and the sort of principle of laïcité. France is formally stated as a secular republic in Article 1 of its own constitution, So you see that there's these competing tensions here.
Mm.
So President Macron's speech, well, they say that timing is everything in politics, and fast forward just a few days after that speech, we have this terrifying Islamist terrorist attack in the northwestern suburbs of Paris.
Well, this is it. And I mean, if you remember back to the Bataclan atrocity, so many of the people involved in that who did the shooting had come from that town over in Belgium, which is more or less a no-go zone for the police, where it was basically 100% kind of Islamic fundamentalists who were kind of running it. And it was a very dangerous place. I don't even know if that still exists, whether that's been changed, whether that's been addressed. But certainly it looked like a very dangerous place 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, Mike, I made the point that in my piece for the Telegraph, that in the post-COVID world, Europe's leaders really have to get together, understand the threat of Islamist separatism in their specific countries, and what kind of collective action can be taken to reduce that threat. Also, what ways, what kind of policy approaches can be taken to significantly reduce public support within segregated communities for deeply authoritarian ideologies which directly run counter to conventional liberal democratic norms. And I think that's something that needs to be prioritized, right, and that should be at the heart of social policy across a number of European countries.
Well, something that you also were remarking upon, which amazed me, was the not very many, but several kind of academics, Islamic academics in this country, who basically were calling for the closing down of the Charlie Hebdo magazine on the basis that it was too provocative and somehow offensive to Muslims, as though having a magazine was equated to murdering people.
Well, I'd make the point that if you close down a particular publisher, that's not going to automatically improve social cohesion in the French Republic. The reality of the matter is, if you were to take on that kind of action, you'd only serve to embolden Islamist extremist elements within the French Muslim population. Thereby, you'd actually be weakening patriotic reformist figures within the French Muslim population as well.
Yeah, but I'm talking about people, academics in this country, Rakib.
Oh yeah, well, I think that we've had Muslim figures in the UK who've called for the shutting down of Charlie Hebdo, and I'd really make the point that whether it's in France, the UK, or Germany, if you go down the road of banning particular publishers, banning specific materials, you run the risk of generating a cultural backlash in the secular-minded mainstream. You embolden Islamist extremist elements within the broader Muslim population in countries of Europe. And you will also empower hard-right political factions who, they provide these arguments of their societies running the risk of being, suffering some kind of Islamist takeover. So the idea that if you take these kind of actions, you would improve social cohesion outcomes, I'm sorry, Mike, that is quite laughable.
Yeah, well, it is absolutely. It is absolutely laughable. But I mean, as long as we've got people in places like the University of Durham who are calling for this kind of thing to happen, and basically saying that it's an absolute insult to an entire religion to allow this publication to exist, as if to justify the actions of the guy who beheaded a teacher, it's quite frankly extraordinary. I mean, if you had said the equivalent, and you were not an Islamic academic, I suspect you would be out on your ear. But apparently, this guy's still working there.
Well, I'd make the point that I've seen individuals frame this Islamist terrorist attack as a state-led anti-Muslim brutality, because the police, the terrorist had shown threatening behaviour towards the police after he had decapitated a school teacher on the street.
Yeah,
there's people say, "Oh, this was heavy-handed."
Yeah, why did they shoot him when he only had a knife?
I think it's quite remarkable, really, that this vicious Islamist terrorist attack is somehow being repackaged as an episode of state-led anti-Muslim brutality. It's one of the most egregious forms of victimhood politics that I've come across in a very long time.
Yeah, and what about the French people's reaction? Because I haven't seen quite so many people out on the street about something like this for a long time.
Well, I'd make the point that, and I said this earlier, Mike, that this was ultimately a vicious attack on the integrity of the French Republic.
Yes, no,
Its
I get
long
that,
and
but
rich
what I'm
history of
saying is that
secularism.
why is there more of a kind of reaction to this than there has been to anything else before?
Well, I think almost it's almost a case where school teachers in France, for example, they're almost seen as uh, almost like a frontline infantry when it comes to representing France's secular liberal traditions. So the school teacher in this case was showing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in a civics class on freedom of expression. So and then for his the gruesome demise that he suffered at the hands of an Islamist terrorist. I think that it's a real wake up call even within France, that there might be a feeling within the secular French mainstream that we've simply had enough of the kind of influence of religious and authoritarianism within the French Republic, and there needs to be a robust pushback to this.
And is there a big Chechen population in France, or is this kind of likely to be a kind of one-off situation?
Well, I'd make the point, Mike, that Islamist terrorist attacks which are taking place in France, the perpetrators have been of different ethnic backgrounds. What I will say though, for just make a broader point, that when it comes to refugee policy, we need to have a robust integration framework in place. If refugees who they may well have experienced traumatic events in their country of origin, that to successfully integrate refugees uh, into the new society, you could say that serious effort needs to be put in to do that. And I feel that policymakers, members of the political classes, they feel very generous spirited when they put forward a liberal refugee policy, but they fail to understand the risks involved if integration afterwards, if it fails, there's very serious problems that may arise for wider society.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Dr. Rakib Ehsan, Centre on Radicalisation and Terrorism at the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Read his piece on Twitter. I've put it out there. It's in the Telegraph today.